Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be the first of probably a couple of videos I'll be doing on the Avatar Legends role-playing game now that the core book is out. At least I have it. I got my PDF, I suppose, very early this morning. It was at like 1:30. Did spend a few hours after that going through it. So this first video, as you can probably tell from the title, I'm going to be going into sort of the intro lore material, as well as the lore that they give about the Kyoshi era. I know not a lot of you will probably be wondering, why aren't you doing the Roku stuff first? That's the new stuff. There's enough of it, like it's clear that all or the majority of the new information is there. So I'll be going over that in the second video, just because I need to give myself a little bit of time to go over that so I'm more familiar with it. So I'm just doing this sort of initial video to give my general thoughts on how the book works in terms of how it presents its information, how good it is, that sort of thing. So yeah, let's get into it here. So for the most part, if I just, I suppose, briefly show you the PDF, I'm not going to be referring to it too much in the grand scheme of things, just because it is a bit kind of, you know, they said that they don't want people showing it off and so on. But for the most part, we're talking about Chapter 2, the world of the Avatar, which is basically the setting chapter. Now, this chapter is really long. It's basically, I think, in or around 85 pages. And it covers an intro section, covering details on effectively general lore and stuff about like Wan's era, before you get into the 5 separate eras that you can actually play in the game, which they go into obviously in a little bit more detail. For anyone wondering, like, for the most part the book is just text. There are images, but most of the images are either screenshots straight from the show or basically stock imagery, promo imagery, like the Kyoshi image I have on screen here, or like the cover for the book. They only, like, completely what feels like brand new imagery that I saw was a few promo shots that I guess we'll see on merchandise at some point. Maybe it was created specifically for the game, but I hadn't seen them before, for sort of like a nice new image of Korra, nice new image of Aang. And then on all the playbooks, which are basically character creation bits, they do have like brand new imagery for, you know, ideas for each of those characters, you know, like the bold, and they have like a fun character there. I might show off some of them in one of these videos, but for most part we're talking about the setting chapter. And again, visually there's not a lot to show, even if I was just going to sit here with the PDF open the whole video, because it is mostly text. And in the grand scheme of things, ultimately in this video I am going to be, for the most part, just reading out lore for the most part, because the way the book presents its information, obviously it is a settings chapter. It's meant to get people up to speed even if they're not familiar with Avatar, so it goes into sort of the basic information but also has to give a little bit more. But if you know your stuff and you're familiar with basically all the information from the Avatar stuff, from the comics, the shows, you know everything, you'll notice that there probably isn't a ton of brand new info throughout this. The Roku stuff is obviously where it does stand out. There are little bits and pieces scattered amongst this that feels like it is new, or it's just sort of like, finally confirmation from that thing that felt kind of obvious. So we'll get into it. So like I said, it starts off with basically the history of the world. So it goes into the before the Avatar era. So it basically recaps Wan's story. Now, it doesn't go into too much more detail beyond what we saw directly in the show. There is one bit right at the start. You probably saw I had it highlighted there when I showed you the PDF. It said, long ago, humans and spirits inhabited separate realms, but then 2 primordial spirits, Rava and Vatu, pierced the barrier separating them, allowing spirits to enter the physical world. So we technically knew this piece of information already, because Vatu says it in the show, though he says it as in like, I did it, not specifically the 2 of them. The art book for book 2 sort of clarifies that it was actually both of them. So it is nice to have, I suppose, in a more like lore centric thing rather than the art book, which is more focused on the concept stuff. It's nice to have sort of canonically it completely stated that it was sort of the two of them, I suppose, initially battling that actually pierced between the worlds and allowed sort of both sides to travel between the different realms. So that is a kind of cool foundational thing, highlighting again the significance of Rava and Vatu as spirits. Now, again, for the most part, it goes over the creation of the Avatar in pretty, standard details, telling you, this is how he learned the four elements, fused together, Avatar spirit, Avatar cycle, and so on. The reincarnation cycle. It explains the basic stuff, but it's nicely written. Like, it is good to read this, even if you are sort of an expert, lore expert and stuff like that. You get just a nice, like, okay, cool. It's worded nicely. The bit that I will show you is what happens sort of on the next page, is that we get this map. Now, this is pretty cool, I think, for sure, because we actually get some reasonable information out of this map, because I think this is kind of one of the first like proper official maps that's actually sort of like, annotated with place names. Now, most of it we know. If you look just specifically at the map key then at the bottom, and you just go through the numbers. Agna Kela, we know that from the Kyoshi novels. That's the capital of the Northern Water Tribe. Ba Sing Se, we know. The Beifong Metalbending Academy, know. Banti Island, to some people, may not be super familiar, but I think now that people have read the Kyoshi novels, and especially if you follow my channel, you'll know very clearly that Banti Island is a fire island specifically. I don't think we had amazing context for like the location of it, but you can see here it's number 4, and number 4 is just like here. You can see it there just below the sort of volcano kind of type thing. So that's that. Chameleon Bay, fine. Chen Bao, interestingly, you'll note number 6 up there towards the north of the Earth Kingdom. They explain this in the section of the book on the Roku era. The significance of this place is basically part of a sort of political dispute between the Earth Kingdom and the Northern Water Tribe about basically fishing territories. Again, I'll cover that in more detail when I do the Roku era video. Crescent Island makes sense. Eastern Air Temple, Ember Island, Fire Fountain City. We know all of these from either the Kyoshi novels or ATLA or Korra. Fire Island Prison is not the boiling rock as far as I'm aware. In this case, it's specifically referring to like the prison where like Hama is held and so on. Foggy Swamp, Gao Ling, Harry Bulkan, we know from the quick start for the Legends role-playing game. It's basically the name for the section of the Fire Nation capital where like the nobles live. So it's a specific part of the capital of the Fire Nation. Kalaya Mountain Range, yeah, we know what that is. Kyoshi Island, Lake Laogai. Natsuo Island, you can see right there, right in between the sort of tail here of the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom. It's basically a island that was disputed over, I think in the Roku era as well. That's why it has the red dot beside it. They basically described this as being an island that Sozin tries to take over as part of his initial sort of colonization. Mainly to get resources to further enhance the military. Like he needs like metal to build the ships. That's their main technology. And that's effectively what that is about. Again, I'll go into more detail on it when I do the era specifically. Northern Air Temple, Northern Spear Portal, Omashu, Republic City / Cranefish Town. I know I often get confused about the exact location of it, because I often want to be like, oh, is it down like here somewhere? But then I remember, no, that's more like almost Kyoshi Island kind of range. It's actually more up here towards the north in the middle of the map here. So nice to get the location just a little bit more detail clarified. And that, yeah, Republic City and Crayfish Town are effectively the same thing in different eras. Siwang Desert, Southern Air Temple, Southern Spear Portal, Sun Warrior Ancient City, number 26. So you can see that's actually just a little bit north on the edge of the Fire Nation. It's actually close-ish to the Western Air Temple, which is kind of interesting. That it really keeps that one out of the way, and you understand why it is quite secret. Water Tribe's Sacred Island, 27, you can see it's right here in the middle of the ocean, sort of like, they describe it as effectively, it is exactly halfway between the Southern Water Tribe and the Northern Water Tribe, and that's effectively the whole point of this little island, is that because the two tribes have a history of dispute, not a lot of it coming to like serious action, they often come to meet on this island in the middle of the world to discuss issues between the tribes. That's what that's about. So that's kind of a cool new thing we didn't know about. Western Air Temple 29 is at Wolf Cove. Now, Wolf Cove is, as far as I'm aware, it's a new thing, but it's just a name for something we've known about for a while. This is basically just the name for the Southern Water Tribe capital. So that makes sense. No real problem there. Zygon Village, of course, from the Kyoshi novels, we know about that. That's the whole Governor Tei situation. And also Zaofu gets its location more accurately depicted, I suppose. So, obviously, there's a lot more that they could go into. Like, there's a lot of, blank spots on the map. And, they could have gone into more depth. But pretty nice overall. There's some new information here, even if it's not like a crazy amount of new information. So that is the map. Next, we get to a section on the 4 nations. And this is just a general. We're not in any specific era here. This is just describing the general idea of the nations. The water tribes primarily exist in the frigid north and south poles, frozen landscapes where snow, sleet, and freezing temperatures are the norm. The Earth Kingdom is the largest nation, has the most varied landscape, and so on. Fire Nation is a series of islands to the west. Air nomads are a nomadic people, but they have 4 temples on the edges of the map. That sort of thing, just describing the basics of them. Then we get a more detailed section on each of the nations. So the first one is the Water Tribe. And again, I could spend ages reading through all of this, but if you've watched the series, you probably know all of this. Or if you've ever looked at sort of the Avatar wiki page describing the tribes or the nations, like, again, it's worded in a very similar way to that, and not a lot of it has specifically new information in it. In that, on the Water Tribe situation, a lot of the detail in like all of the eras will refer to the current status of the relationship between the Northern and the Southern Water Tribe, without ever actually explaining what the issue sort of was in a way in the first place. We obviously understand it as it more being the Northern Water Tribe being the sort of more strict with their culture aspects, and that causing a feud, and then the South formed for there. But it doesn't even go into that sort of like, fundamental sort of lore all that much. The water tribes are 2 distinct tribes living at the northern and southern poles of the world. For most of human history, both were governed by the Northern Water Tribe. They're not only united by political bonds, but also a shared spiritual heritage and waterbending. Additionally, a small settlement of waterbenders lives in seclusion in part of the Earth Kingdom called the Foggy Swamp. Each has its own traditions, values, waterbending styles. They described during the 100-Year War, this escalated the tensions between the tribes. They stopped communicating with each other because of this, and so on. In Korra's era, the South achieved independence, and you get a lot of just the basic information, like, say, when Iroh explains to Zuko what makes the people of those nations unique. You effectively get that sort of just gone into a little bit more detail here. They have a section on Agna Kel as the capital of the Northern Water Tribe, and it's just, again, we've seen this place before. We didn't know it was called this back in ATLA, but we do now. I'll mention just a bit right towards the end here that just explains, after the era of Wan, the first Avatar, the first waterbenders learned bending from observing the power of the moon over the ocean. And so these 2 spirits hold great significance to the tribe. During the full moon, people make offerings of food to Tui and La. So they do this with, I think they mention it in basically all of the nations, clarifying this point of the bending animals and like wording it in a way where, like, the first waterbenders, so the people who were waterbenders anyway, learned bending from observing the power of the moon and the ocean. I know a lot of people seem to have a bit of trouble with that, and I like that it's worded in that way that makes it sort of clear. It doesn't quite create the difference between sort of just someone who can bend and sort of having the martial art of bending, but that's the point that is effectively being made here. Little section on Wolf Cove, basically just describing that it is the Southern Water Tribe capital, and again the rough idea of a council of elders, and so on. Foggy Swamp, not much extra detail on this, really. Just describing again, it's based around the banyan grove tree in the swamp. It's a spiritual destination. They practice plant bending, and people know about them more now because Aang and co met them and kind of made them a little bit more public. The spirit portals get mentioned here along with, Tui and La, but again, not too much extra information really presented here. Pretty just standard stuff of like, if you didn't know about this, here it is. Then we get to the section on the Earth Kingdom here. There's actually a few little bits of here that I noted. An Earth monarch rules the entire 55-state kingdom. I don't remember ever hearing that before, that the Earth Kingdom was 55 states. It might have been a tiny bit of information presented somewhere, but to me it's relatively new that it's 55 states. Interestingly here, you'll notice they didn't do much transition material between Wan's era and basically going straight into the modern era, where basically all of the 5 eras that we're covering here are. Because that's the interesting thing about this, of like, even though Kyoshi, which is the like earliest era that we actually deal with in the game, we're still effectively only dealing with roughly a 500-year period of the world's history that spans 10,000 years. So there's a huge gap of time to explain how things go from Wan's era to Kyoshi's era. So they flesh it out a little bit here in the Earth Kingdom. The region's early history is filled with war between various groups vying for power, as seen in the time of Avatar 1, when settlers first fought for control of the territories that eventually became the Earth Kingdom. Wars played a major role in the kingdom's existence ever since. And so on. It goes into the 100-Year War and stuff like that afterwards. But I do like that they mention just that idea that the main landmass effectively is, during Avatar 1's era, struggle for power, and this is what sort of defined the places. Now, we roughly come to that conclusion of like interpreting that war that Wan faces right at the end of Beginnings as being that clearly like the early Earth Kingdom people won that war and claimed the main landmass of the world as their nation, and then the people of the early Fire Nation, Water Tribes, lost that war and settled elsewhere, kind of type thing. They don't quite say that, but I think that's roughly what they're trying to get at, because it can't be this is what was happening before Wan sealed the portals, because otherwise spirits would be the main point of call. So I think that is what they're referring to. It's humanity's conflicts that Wan deals with for basically the rest of his life. They do cover Ba Sing Se here as the capital of the Earth Kingdom. Interestingly, they don't mention the pretty clear history of it previously being like an underground city and the above ground bit being sort of the more modern region era. Now, part of that is obviously that even Kyoshi's era is still Ba Sing Se above ground, and we don't actually know the transition point when, it was still that kind of underground city. Again, the Crystal Catacombs exist for a reason. They don't cover that really here. They did describe the walls in quite heavy detail, I suppose, just because this is going to be a major setting for most people's games. You have the from outermost ring to innermost. There's the defensive outer wall, the agrarian zone, the defensive inner wall, the lower ring where poorer citizens live, the middle ring where the middle class live, the upper ring where the royal palace and the wealthiest citizens live, alongside military and government officials. So there's stuff like that, and they just described like upper ring may go where they please within Ba Sing Se, middle ring may travel anywhere freely except the upper ring. Lower ring may not travel to the middle or upper rings without a passport. So just some detail there that's kind of nice. Omashu gets covered next. Second largest city in the Earth Kingdom. Not a ton of extra stuff here, other than like it goes over the Oma and Shu story, and then just explains that like Omashu is known for innovation and technological progress. They see technology and bending as working hand in hand. Due to its size, importance, and unique innovations, Omashu has always competed with Ba Sing Se for prominence in the Earth Kingdom. So that's the rough explanation, I suppose, for why Omashu has a king or queen, as well as Ba Sing Se, without actually just full-on explaining the point of like why specifically this place specifically has that name. That feels like it roughly does explain it. Now we do get a queen of Omashu in one of the other eras, so we can cover that when we get there. Siwang Desert, again, about what you'd expect here, you know, covering the basics here. Kyoshi Island gets covered here, the Kyoshi warriors, a little bit of history on Kyoshi here, but it's not the Kyoshi section just yet. Wan Shi Tong has a little bit of a section here, again, all the basics that we know about him, just the Zhao destroyed the library, he took it back to the spirit world, you know, pretty standard stuff. Fire Nation. So, again, this is mainly covering the sort of history of the Fire Nation that we sort of learned from Kyoshi, and then they inflict the genocide on the air nomads and so on. Not a ton extra for the most part. They go into a little bit more detail about some of the makeup of the Fire Nation capital, about like what Harry Bulkan is. The wealthy elite of the city live in Harry Bulkan, housed within a dormant volcanic crater. Like little bits and pieces, like the Royal Fire Academy gets mentioned, but it's all just the references that we already know. Fire Fountain City gets explained here. Bonte tribe on the island. Sages have lived in on the island in the South Fire Nation for thousands of years. That's pretty important. They live cut off from the rest of the world and choose to remain uninvolved in its troubles. They just describe it has the pools of water. They healed Korra, of course. Avatar Kuruk and Yahda from the Kyoshi novels. It's making all the standard references. Sun Warrior Ancient City. So this is interesting. There is a point here where they say the Sun Warriors, the city's inhabitants, were the first people to master firebending after humans left the Lion Turtle cities. So that's just acknowledging that Wan, of course, we saw learn from a dragon, but the first firebenders post that time to learn from the dragons were the Sun Warriors, and that's their significance, of course. Not a ton extra on them for the most part, other than, like, again, they cover the idea that the two of the remaining dragons are, of course, live on the island. So there's that. Agni Kai gets a mention here. Basic stuff. Air Nomads, again, it's all roughly what we know. They covered the genocide, the return in Korra's era, and they have a brief section on each of the temples, like describing the idea that the monks live in the north and south temple, nuns in the east and west, and again, the references, the bits and pieces that we see to each of them, describing that the northern temple gets destroyed in ATLA to where the Mechanist was, and that sort of stuff. There's not a ton to really say here. They covered the Air Nomad tattoos here. Again, it's covering the basics, so if it seems weird why, like, there's so much, you know, repetition, it wasn't all meant to be new. It's meant to cover the stuff like this. There's a section on bending here. Not a lot to go on here in the bending section. They mentioned the animals and the sun, the moon and ocean spirits for water bending. They don't really explain sort of how bending really works as such. It's very general. All benders are born with innate elemental abilities and must undergo training to master their element. They can only bend a single element. Through specialized forms of bending, they can push that element to its limit. Give a few examples here, obviously. Harmonic convergence gets mentioned here, chi blocking, and so on. Just the standard stuff. There's a section on technology. It's basically just to give you a sense for what is and is not good technology in each of the eras. I don't really want to go through it in any particular detail here, just because it's all roughly stuff that we know. There is a section on the spirit world here next, and again, it's pretty to the point. They don't describe anything we don't already know. Which, again, for people new to this game, basically just getting into Avatar through this game, absolutely, 100%. Like, you know, this is good stuff. But for us who know all this stuff, it is stuff we do already know. There's a section on the Order of the White Lotus, and you'd think here there's no way they can possibly go through this section without revealing anything, but they do manage to do it. The only thing that really stood out to me here was this little line here that just says, "The White Lotus originated from a group of scholars dedicated to improving the world and uniting the nations." It's very general. That does not tell us anything of significance, but I don't believe, like, anything really relating to the origin of the White Lotus was ever mentioned before. It seems very logical as the origin of that group, but that's all there really is. They do mention Zhaibao and the origin of the Red Lotus afterwards. Again, for anyone wondering, like, Xiaobai is almost presented as this like legendary ancient character, but you have to remember that he is a character who, like, in a future ATLA comic set after Imbalance, could very well come to the forefront and be a character there. Like, he is a character who is alive during Aang's life and stuff like that. Iroh and him met, they know each other basically. So the clarification on that is nice, even though we already knew it. They discover there's a section here on like discrimination and challenges, and they just cover like a little bit on each of the nations. The water tribes have accepted relationships outside the heterosexual cultural norm so long as the people kept it private. However, the northern water tribe maintained strict gender roles well into Aang's era, with women only being permitted to learn waterbending for healing and men only for combat. Likewise, for many eras, water tribe women could not choose their spouses for themselves. By the Korra era, northern water tribe did not adhere so strictly to these gendered traditions. I believe there is a point mentioned later on in the Korra era where they say that like Eska and Desna were actually sort of important in getting rid of some of these sort of traditions and, you know, making it so that it's okay for like same-sex relationships and marriage, I think. Earth Kingdom, it's just sort of disparity between the classes and stuff like that. Fire Nation, again, it's just this sort of Sozin thing. He was responsible for stoking xenophobic hate within his people and outlawed same-sex marriages later on in his life. He used propaganda campaigns to justify committing genocide against the air nomads. Now, one of the big teases I'll give you for the Roku era is that they heavily flesh out this section of Sozin. Because I've always complained in Turf Wars that they just randomly added this onto Sozin. He is like the villain of villains because he was the one who basically led a genocide against a whole quarter of the world, effectively, the air nomads. You don't need to add anything extra onto that character, but they did. They actually do some good stuff in the Roku era in terms of explaining that and actually making it a bit of a character point. Both in terms of why he maybe has issues with same-sex relationships, but also why he maybe has a dislike for the air nomads as well. That him, taking them all out was not just him hunting for the Avatar after Roku, but he had a reason to go after them in the way that he did. Now, obviously, he's a villain. You're not meant to agree with it, but they give, a sense for like, oh, that at least explains the sense of like he wanted to take out the air nomads for like another reason as well. So there's that. Out of all the four nations, the air nomads have consistently been the most progressive. Nomad philosophies meant children were raised by the community rather than a dual parent home. They welcomed people from all walks of life. And yeah, they never tended to judge or reject people for the most part. So that's all fine. Then we get into the era. So finally, here we are sort of at our sort of main event here, the Kyoshi era. Now, what I'll say about in general what they do here is that it sticks very closely to the material from the books. This era, specifically for the game, is set directly after Shadow of Kyoshi. So you have to sort of put aside a lot of the stuff that we know later about Kyoshi with regards to like the Chin the Conqueror stuff, the stuff with the 46th Earth King, even though it gets mentioned in the later eras because it affects, I suppose, the eras afterwards. The Kyoshi era specifically is still like basically Kyoshi is like 18. Like it's very early on. So because it's set so close, naturally it means they have to kind of laser focus in on the issues that we already know of from those books and not really all that much else. So the Kyoshi era is effectively bandits and pirates. Daofei, obviously, pirates, Fifth Nation type stuff. That is basically all that we get here. The other thing, obviously, is sort of political stuff, instability, the Earth Kingdom really suffering from that sort of stuff. They get that across. They just mentioned that the Yellownecks in the past caused a lot of problems. Autumn Bloom Society. They cover, Kyoshi killing Zhu Ping An. Capturing, of course, Tagaka of the Fifth Nation. And just the setup, obviously, going forward is that there are still splinter fleets from the Fifth Nation, and there are still other Dao Fei groups out there. That's the really obvious setup for a story in Kyoshi's era. Fire Nation, again, they cover the Camellia Peony War, and the whole, Zoryu, Cheijin stuff, Lady Huazo. If you've read The Shadow of Kyoshi, you know all about that, and it's kind of reiterated a couple of times in this section, to the point where the Kyoshi section does feel rather repetitive, because it's just like Dao Fei, Dao Fei, Dao Fei, Fifth Nation, Camellia Peony War, clan issues, not anymore because of Zoryu at the end of that, and not a lot else. They give you the details, like Kyoshi's childhood was difficult. Her parents were Jasa and Hark. She's part air nomad, and but there's nothing particularly extra going on here. This era, I think in particular, you can tell they felt like, well, the detail's already there in the book. We just need to sort of present it in a specific way. And there was no real, want to jump in and do more. There is some new stuff we'll get to with regards to the Air Nomad section. But the way they do it here, just to be kind of brief, I'll just quickly show this. So you can see here, after you get past the initial intro to the era, they cover this section more about the game, where they cover the themes that are explored during this era. So you have justice and revenge, loss and abandonment, betrayal and loyalty, law and order, abuse of authority, and harmony without turmoil within. So that's kind of cool that they at least, give you those kind of themes. And then they give you a section on important events and sort of roughly try to tie them into some of those themes kind of type thing. So you get the Wars of Secrets and Daggers, which is referenced in the books. It's not made super abundantly clear. They don't go into massive amounts of detail on this, and so on. But it's effectively just this idea that the political situation in the Earth King is so bad that this is where you're really starting to see a lot of backstabbing, political assassinations going on, and you get that idea of the people in the succession path to being the Earth King are trying to take each other out to gain power, and this is causing huge problems in the Earth Kingdom. So they just reference this idea, and I like that they mention sort of the takeaways in a way, that they explain the details that we know, and then they say current consequences from the Wars of Secrets and Daggers. Politicians are invested in protecting themselves, not the people. Many times local law enforcement goes unchecked by their political supervisors, and the Earth Kingdom people trust in their monarchy is at an all-time low. Yellowneck Uprising, we know what that is exactly. Janju gets mentioned. A generation has lived parentless and fending for themselves because of the violence and so on. Many people distrust Dao Fei, even those who claim to help. Surviving adherents look to reform the Yellownecks under a different name. So, nice. Fall of the Fifth Nation, pretty standard. We saw this in the first Kyoshi novel. Splinter fleets roam the oceans looking for bounty. Deprived of a trading partner, the Southern Water Tribe suffers economically from the Fifth Nation's downfall. That is a little bit of a kind of key point, is that they get across in the section on the water tribes for Kyoshi's era, that the South is suffering during this era financially, because piracy was kind of part of their trade, and how they made some of their money. Some pirates seek to free Tagaka and rebuild the nation. And there's cool things like that they sort of reference, on this idea that, Tagaka is imprisoned, of course. We know that. Of course they'd want to break her out. And they just more or less leave it there as the setup for a story if you want to tell that if you play the game. There's no details on specifically canonically this happens. Tagaka does get an attempted breakout and anything like that. It's just, this is something you could do if you wanted, and I suppose it is canon that people would want to free her. So there's always a little bit of things like that where they stop short of just giving you a little bit more. The false avatar, they just quickly covered the idea of Yoon, basically describe his story. Kyoshi isn't yet trusted by the public as the avatar. She struggles with vengeance and balance. the Avatar mansion was destroyed during her fight with Yoon. Okay, cool. Poisoning of the Earth Sages. We saw this towards the end of the first Kyoshi novel. Earth Sages have lost political power and mistrust each other after Jeonju's betrayal. Some sages work to return to their spiritual roots away from the corruption of politics. Local politicians vie for control in the power vacuum left by the murdered sages who were once the de facto rulers of certain regions. The Camilla War, the consequences from this are the Fire Lord has promoted family members of loyal clans within his government and ousted any rivals. Clans in general become less significant. Common people unhappy with their current clan's ruler begin to look to the Fire Lord to resolve the situation, instead of keeping it an internal clan matter. The Sewon clan is a dying clan with little to no political capital. And again, they sort of set the stage that, oh, maybe a breakout attempt of Hwazo and Cheijin maybe is a plot you want to do in the Fire Nation, without ever really exploring it too much. Earth Kingdom, Kyoshi Era. So, again, pretty standard, because this is the thing that's most heavily explored here. Just outlaws, people out for themselves, the economy problems. They mention Zygon Village is on the brink of ruin and so on. Notable figures and groups. So we get a little bit on Kirima here. Again, just standard, like, here's who she is. They do say this. Now that she's recovered from broken legs in a fight against Yoon, Kirima is eager to find less dangerous jobs to set her up for her eventual retirement. They need to be illegal. The Flying Opera Company is more visible to the public eye thanks to the connection to the Avatar. Finding jobs is more challenging. Some Dao Fei are hesitant to work with the company, while others are a little too eager because they want something from the Avatar. So that's kind of interesting. It's like, obviously it's a logical inference from basically the ending of it, of like she recovers from her injury from that fight and gets back to work effectively. It's more of just a setup for, they say anyone looking to join the Flying Opera Company needs to prove their skills and trustworthiness to Kirima. So it's sort of just setting up, here's where she stands currently if you want to use her in your story, without actually saying what happens next to her. Lao Ge gets a mention here. No reveals about the how accurate or not the information we have about him is. There's no new information really. It's just a recap. Wong, basically similar situation to Kirima, just saying that he could be an earthbending teacher for you if you want. Mok and Wei get mentioned here. Auntie Mui gets mentioned. Bei Fong family, what's left with it during this era, gets mentioned. Stuff like that. Threats and challenges. The Dao Fei, of course. The splinter fleets of the Fifth Nation. Law enforcement, as we saw in parts of like Shadow of Kyoshi, is a problem in Kyoshi's era also. So yeah, there's that. Then we go into the Fire Nation. So again, I think the Earth and Fire Nation specifically during Kyoshi's era they basically make no attempt to add anything extra onto what we already know, which sort of makes sense. They're the most heavily fleshed out. The Fire Nation especially feels like laser focused on that stuff, of just it's word for word like the plot of Shadow of Kyoshi. This is what Zoryu did. Here's Cheijin's involvement, Lady Hwazo's involvement. Rangi gets mentioned here, but again, it's pretty standard stuff of just like, here's how you might want to involve Rangi in a story. Heiran gets mentioned here. Nyahatha does get a mention here as like someone you could go to for more spiritual matters, but maybe don't bring up dark spirits around him because of what happened. Threats and challenges. The Kyoso clan, the Sewon clan, the fall of the noble clans. Nothing extra. Like, they don't mention any other clans in the Fire Nation, the names of them or anything like that. It's just, here's what was presented already. Air Nomads. There is actually some new stuff in the Kyoshi era with the Air Nomads. So, because, like, you maybe got a little bit of this from the bits and pieces, but I think it actually presents it in a way where you much better understand what the dynamic of the Air Nomads is in this era. The air nomads have isolated themselves while struggling with mounting internal issues. Leading into this era, Earth Kingdom sages blamed the air nomads' detachment for Karuk's failures as an avatar. This tension continued when the air nomads of the Southern Air Temple provided sanctuary to Kyoshi after her confrontation with Jonju. Many opposed the idea that she was the true avatar, but the air nomads still took her in. This has culminated in the air nomad elders focusing their people on internal matters, not only to avoid conflict, but as a matter of survival. So this is an era for the air nomads where they choose to be almost even more isolated from the rest of the world, and the sort of sense of them always maybe like helping people, which is sort of what we see to a degree. They even move back from that to just survive in a way what's happening here, in that they're hesitant to get involved until asked for direct assistance, and that, you know, detachment is part of what they're about, but is this maybe taking it too far? They also are struggling with the idea of the loss of spiritual sights, because Karuk, in how he fought the dark spirits, has left many, you know, spiritual sights kind of ruined. And of course that was a response to them falling already into ruin because of the lack of attention given to like the deals that Yang Chen made with the spirits in previous kind of generations. So that's kind of cool. Notable figures and groups, they cover the 4 Council of Elders, and this is where we do get some new names, and they cover just the idea that in this era the council is maybe a little bit too set in their ways, and they bring up the exile of Kelsong as an example of that. He actually helped save a lot of people, but because he did it by effectively sort of killing others, he was exiled, even though you have to view him as being one of the sort of great airbenders of the era. We get introduced to Namthos, Namthose, and there's the 2 dots over the O, so I'm not sure what that does to the pronunciation. Namthos is an esteemed member of the Northern Air Temple's Council of Elders. He's an avid proponent for the air nomads staying uninvolved in the conflicts of the world, and actively tries to discourage young airbenders from absorbing too much outside news for fear they will become distracted from their path. Currently, he has tried to instate a rule to allow only air nomads to visit the Northern Air Temple, while also preventing airbenders still in training there from interacting with outsiders. He believes that the other 3 nations are so prone to violence that they must not be permitted to influence young airbenders in any way. So that's really hard line there of him really wanting to lead the air nomads in a direction to fully isolate themselves, whereas they're nomadic, and our understanding of, I suppose, the air nomads in a good era for them is that they're traveling around the place helping people and, you know, having an influence on the world, and his approach is almost the exact opposite of like really step back, only fall back into everything we're about and not care about others in a way. Jinpa gets mentioned here. You know, they explicitly sort of confirm here, yes, he is part of the Order of White Lotus, not that he mentions it all that much. There's a character named Matangi mentioned here, is a renegade air nun. She is the head of an orphanage in the Earth Kingdom, and she wants to help orphaned children who were orphaned during the Yellowneck Uprising. So there's that. There's some actually cool ideas with this character. When one of her former charges turns out to be in the Dao Fei group, she is torn between staying uninvolved and helping them. She has a way of fostering greatness. Heroes who need to find someone who grew up in the orphanage may seek her out. So, you know, there's a few characters like that who mainly are, I suppose, introduced here as more story setup for the game, rather than directly being, I suppose, major additions to the era in a way of like, this is key information. Next section, this is very interesting, and especially because there's sort of like a cut-in piece that sort of explains things in a very weird way. So there's this character named Gemsten, Gymtsen, like Gemsen. I'm not sure about the pronunciation. Is an air nomad nun from the Eastern Air Temple. She left her position as a sought-after airbending teacher to protect the singing path after her sister died protecting it. The Singing Path is a spiritual site in the Earth Kingdom guarded by a spirit named Wrong, and is now corrupted by a Dao Fei group known as the Ghost Tigers, using it as a hideout. Thanks to continued harassment by the Ghost Tigers, Wrong now wishes to pull her home into the spirit world, but can't do it while they're still there. Ever since her sister's death at the hands of the Ghost Tigers, Yem Sen struggles with urges to exact vengeance. Urges that violate the ethics of the air nomads. She chases the Ghost Tigers through the winding stones of the Singing Path and steers them away from neighboring towns, while inching ever closer to the idea that if she can't find a way to remove them from the Singing Path peacefully, she will have to do it by force. Fascinating story, really interesting idea. Spirit, named spirit here. Love to know more details on that. But then you look above this and there's a section called What's Lost? What is the Singing Path? Who is Wrong? What other spiritual sites are the air nomads losing? These specifics are up to you and your game. None of the sites the air nomads protect in this era make it to the Roku era, and nomads know they're fighting a losing battle. Stories you tell surrounding these sites engage the theme of loss and abandonment, and so on. There's stuff like that where it feels like, okay, that's a really weird approach to introduce the idea. Here is this location that a spirit guards, and you have the rough setup here, but you're leaving all of the key details up to you tell a story using this as a setup. Even though we're in the settings chapter, I don't know why you don't just give a brief description of what type of a spirit Wrong is, like what powers Wrong has, what the Singing Path is as a location, and go from there, because you can still have the actions take place in a little bit of a different way, just with more details. There's a character named Mangal in the Kyoshi era as well, Troublemaker, who lives in the Northern Air Temple. He has snuck away from the Northern Air Temple many times before, and used to play tricks on air nomad monks as a kid. Though if you know it, Mangal is very good at spirit projecting and communicating with spirits. He can even solve problems in nearby villages just by sensing what is causing the spirit's distress and helping to fix it. He's contemplating running away from the temple for good because he's so misunderstood. He knows the surrounding area well, including places where local Dao Fei frequent. Heroes with spirit problems or issues with local Dao Fei would find a useful guide in Mangal, but he does have a tendency to get into trouble. Threats and challenges: protecting the Avatar relics. Exile, that more deals with the whole Kelsong thing and them being too stuck in their ways and so on. Criticism of their philosophy is also a challenge for the air nomads during this era. And that is the end of the air nomad section. So obviously the most heavily fleshed out, because other than Kyoshi went there at the end of the first book, and Jimpa's now part of the team in the second book, you don't cut back to it all that much to get much information. So I do appreciate that they added in a few character names there, a few ideas that are actually quite cool, just to flesh out the world building side of things a bit. Water tribes. Also, don't learn too much about these in the grand scheme of things over the course of the Kyoshi novels. The startling differences between the northern and southern water tribes are never more apparent than during the Kyoshi era. The southern water tribe has suffered economically for some time, which has resulted in many people leaving to pursue a life of piracy instead. Capital City in the South Pole was once much larger, but it has been steadily shrinking in population as more people move from the city to villages upon the open ice to provide for themselves. Even after the fall of the Fifth Nation, piracy is a tempting alternative to poverty. The Southern Water Tribe has no navy to protect itself with, and as a result is particularly vulnerable. And we get the idea that many in the South question how those in the North could claim to govern them and fail to support their struggling peoples. So this is more of a conflict time for the two tribes, where they don't have incredible communication. While these chieftains may have lost hope in the South, they'll ensure their people's survival. So notable figures: Atuat gets a mention here, Tagaka gets mentioned, obviously. Kuroka gets mentioned here just from the perspective of, because he lived such a short amount of time, he's still sort of fresh in a lot of people's minds because obviously Kyoshi is relatively early into her tenure as the Avatar, so people still remember the older one quite heavily as well. So the Water Tribes, of course, would remember what happened to their Avatar, especially the North, where he is from. They also mention, the whole thing of like, if those who find themselves in the spirit world and in need of help might run to Karuk, as he is on a mission there to find his deceased fiancée Umi taken by Ko the Face Stealer. So that gets a mention. Then we get into some new characters we didn't hear about before from the novels. There's a character here named Pitsiolak. Not sure about the pronunciation here. Some of these Water Tribe names of new characters are pretty long here. So Pitseolak. Older warrior from the Southern Water Tribe, determined to hunt down pirates from his tribe and make them return home. He blames the recent history of young people going off to become pirates for the Southern Water Tribe's decline. Combat is a challenge for the elderly warrior, but he still has some fight in him. Unlike the Northern Water Tribe, which has robust and organized defenses, the Southern Water Tribe relies on a militia. Many capital city militia members respect Pitsiolak for his dedication and almost supernatural skill with a bladed boomerang. So that's kind of cool. He's meant to be one of your sort of weapons kind of teachers here, specifically for the boomerang. There's a character here named Apilarjuk, Aupilaaorjuk, a stealthy courier who brings important messages from one tribe to the other. So, adventurous courier from the Southern Water Tribe, and he travels from tribe to tribe delivering correspondences. Missed that. Her job is risky because sometimes she carries messages that others don't want to arrive at their destination, and there's such a great distance between the tribes that a lot can go wrong. So it's important because communication is not great between the tribes. So she can offer introductions to important people in either tribes, as well as to the White Lotus, with whom she's had a few clandestine interactions. So she's not a member, but she knows of them. That's kind of interesting. Apilarjuk only speaks of her relationship with the White Lotus to a trusted few. When the White Lotus hires her to make a delivery, it's because that delivery is of extreme importance and would result in disaster if it fell into the wrong hands. So kind of cool, relating to the dynamic between the tribes there. There's a character called Chukagnik, Chukagnak, or I suppose like the pronunciation is like Chukagnok is more of, I suppose, the pronunciation there, based on the whole like stuff like that. I don't know. Young Water Tribe healer who has embraced a life of piracy. She was a poor healer, hated the man she was arranged to marry, so she left home before the trappings of tradition could swallow her. She now lives by her own rules and respects others who do the same, so long as they don't get in her way. Loves the little luxuries in life, whether they come from in the form of silky pillows, extravagant feasts, or exotic birds. She doesn't care what others think of her, but does tire of disrespect quickly and has no qualms with throwing repeat offenders overboard. Chukagnik is a bit of an oddity within the pirate world, since not many from the Northern Water Tribe turn to this kind of life. She's now in command of a Fifth Nation splinter fleet at odds with some of the other fleets. Recently she sank several ships filled with valuable cargo, but had to escape before they could retrieve it. And so there's a sort of pirate, find the treasure plot straight there for you to deal with if you so wish. Last section here on the Kyoshi era, threats and challenges. Economic troubles in the Southern Water Tribe. We already discussed that. Entrance to the spirit world. Though the spirit oasis is beautiful and serene, it has unfortunately been struck by tragedy in the past. Ko the Face Stealer, a frightening spirit who lives up to his name, emerged from the oasis to abduct Avatar Karuk's fiancée, Umi, and stole her face. Those who visit the spirit oasis may be at risk should another spirit with malicious intentions rise out of the water. So, the people of the Water Tribe are equipped to deal with this because they are spiritual, and so on. Piracy, and that's where we end the section. I nearly forgot to include this section. Towards the end of the book, there is a section called Adventure Hooks, which is effectively more clearly a section laying out the idea you could play a game where this is the story at play. So they have hooks for basically each era, including the Kyoshi era. So the first one of these is called the Three Lanterns Social Club. When a Daofei group by the name of the Three Lanterns Social Club claims they want to join forces with the Flying Opera Company to help the Avatar, the company is immediately suspicious. Kirima tasks the companions with infiltrating this fishy Daofei group, asking them to identify their real leader and what their motives are. To do this, the group has to hide their identities as allies of the Flying Opera Company and pretend to do anything to join these seedy outlaws. Perhaps the Three Lantern Social Club's intentions are sincere, or perhaps their goal is to bring down the Avatar in order to make the Earth Kingdom safer for Daofei. Doesn't tell you too much other than, I guess, another Daofei group is called the Three Lantern Social Club, but then you also bring up the idea of like, wait, does that mean it's canon or not canon? Are they committing to it in that it either is canon and they're just completely unwilling to commit to anything, or you just can't really consider it canon? Next hook is called the Splinter Fleet. And again, some of these will be familiar with the material I mentioned earlier on. Fire Navy is working hard to return people enslaved by the Fifth Nation to their homes, but there's one village whose residents just can't be tracked down. If the companions want to find these missing people, they must hunt down a splinter fleet of the Fifth Nation and get them to give up the location of the villagers. Chukugnak's fleet does not engage in slavery, but they were around when that crime was common in the Fifth Nation. Pirates don't give out information for free, so they may ask the group for something highly questionable in exchange, such as help stealing from a dangerous target or finding lost loot in waters patrolled by the Fire Navy. So again, there's directly involving one of the characters they introduce into things and the whole pirate side of things. Again, similar to that, the prison. Tagaka is the only person who knows the location of a person she enslaved that the players need information from. So the companions must break into the prison beneath the cloud guide to speak to her. This is a nearly impossible task, but if the companions can sneak their way inside, trick the guards into thinking they have official business there, or get themselves arrested for some serious destruction, they may just have an in. The real challenge is getting back out again, since Tagaka will likely demand her freedom before she shares any information. And as for companions who don't particularly feel like freeing someone who took slaves, they may need another creative solution for getting information out of the dreaded pirate queen. Again, are they committing to the idea that it is canon that there is a breakout attempt for Tagaka, or that it never happens? It's a little bit unclear. There's the governor. The young Governor Tae Si-hung has requested instruction in making better governing decisions, and the companions have been sent as his new mentors. Zygon Village now has a new school and herbal clinic that the poorest villagers have access to for free. But villages that have suffered like Zygon don't recover with just a couple of changes. The village needs a lot of improvement, and Tae's understanding of his role is paltry, even if it is improving. If the group cannot turn him into a fit leader, an opportunistic Daofei named Mei Li may take advantage of the village vulnerability and steal control while the villagers are too disorganized to fight back. So expanding on Tae there, and I suppose kind of clarifying some of the stuff, like there's a herbal clinic there, school, that's nice, but improvements are still needed. Next hook is the Lost Air Nomad. After exiling an air nomad named Sewang, Tsewang, for misdeeds she didn't commit, the Council of Elders at the Eastern Air Temple realizes their mistake and sends the companions to go find the exiled nun. Unfortunately, she seems to have vanished into thin air. The companions have to do some sleuthing to discover that the air nun is trying to join a Daofei organization. If they don't hurry to stop her, she may truly never be able to return to the Eastern Air Temple. So that's kind of cool. She's exiled for something she didn't actually do. That's an interesting concept playing into the dynamics of the air nomads at the time. The escape. When Lady Huazo escapes house arrest, the Kyoso clan tasked the companions with helping to track her down and bring her back. They're not only offering a boon with their clan, but cold hard cash as well. However, the Sowan clan approaches the group shortly afterwards and asks for the help bringing the escapee to safety so that she isn't forced to live the rest of her life imprisoned. The group has to make a choice about whose side to take, so getting involved in the Fire Nation, so the clan politics in the immediate aftermath of Shadow of Kyoshi. Does it add too much more? Not especially, but you know, it's up to you if you want to consider them canon or not. So, that's the material I'm going to cover for this video. Obviously, like I said, 90% of it, maybe 85% of it, is stuff we already know. It is presented quite nicely in that it's enjoyable to read, even if you are familiar with the material. Just as a recap and just helping you, I suppose, have full context for what that line in that novel that you read and know about means for the era. Obviously there's some new stuff here, tiny bits of information that just add on to things. That's quite nice. A few new characters mentioned just to have like a name attached to like the leader of this nation or whatever. So it's an interesting one for sure. There are times when it feels like, why don't we like go into like a little bit more detail on some of these things, in that I don't think in this era they actually give the name of the two tribes like leaders, but they do, I think, for like the Roku era. So there's that sense of definitely like they knew going in they need to flesh out the Roku era, so they actually have a substantial amount of new information. But because there's enough sort of established in the Kyoshi era that they didn't do that. So there are frustrations here. There's definitely times when you feel like a little bit more new information could have, you know, done wonders here to just, you know, add more onto things. But yeah, that's the intro section as well as the Kyoshi stuff. So in the comments, let me know if you have any questions about this section of the kind of lore of the book, the Kyoshi stuff. If you got your PDF as well, what are your thoughts on what you read in this so far? But like I said, the next video, when I cover just the Roku era, will have the majority of the new information. I will also make a video on the other three eras as well, so the 100-Year War era, Aang's era, and Korra's era, and cover them as well. But there's not as much as the Roku era, obviously. So, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.